What's up, dudes and dudettes? So today we're looking at body fat percentage. We're going to take a trip from 60% body fat down to 6% body fat. And to make things interesting and clickable, we're going to be using some of Greg Doucette's images from his Laser Eye Vision series, just to make things, a little bit juicier. First of all, two things. First, this is only going to be dudes, men, males in this video, just to make things a little bit easier to compare. I will do a future video with females in the future. Second of all, body fat percentage is really just an estimation. You can't tell 100% for sure. Even a DEXA scan, an underwater weighing, certainly electrical impedance, any of these things are just going to be an estimation. Even laser eyes, it varies based on the picture, angle, if they're flexing, if they're dehydrated. So many factors go into body fat percentage, and it's impossible to say for sure you are 70% body fat. I typically give clients a range. I say you might be 15 to 17% body fat because I don't know for sure. So let's start at 40 to 60% body fat. Now that is a pretty big range, but the signs and symptoms are pretty similar. So at 40 to 60% body fat, you basically have no muscular definition anywhere. So in the arms, in the calves, in the legs, certainly in the abdominals, you have little to no muscles showing through because they are covered in a layer of fat. You also probably have a sizable belly, especially as you go up over 40%. So 50%, 60%, even 70% or more, you almost certainly have a very sizable belly because that is where human beings tend to store a lot of their body fat. Men tend to store more fat in the gut compared to women, but basically anyone at 50 to 60% body fat is going to have a sizable belly and a sizable amount of visceral fat. This is extremely unhealthy. And anyone who tells you you can be healthy at any weight is straight up lying to you. It's a comforting lie, but that's the worst kind of lie out there because it's easy to believe and we want to believe it. You are not healthy at 60% body fat. No one is. It's just not possible, and you are taking years off your life and decreasing the quality of those years at the same time. So if you are 50 to 60% body fat, I would say it's not a medical emergency, but it should be a medical priority to lose that body fat. And it is certainly possible, as Greg showed in his transformation videos. Now, as you go below 40% body fat, you will notice the size of the belly reducing. You might notice a little bit of definition in your arms, in your calves, in your quads. And as you go down to 30% or so, you will notice these definitions becoming a little bit crisper, a little bit clearer. At 30% body fat, you are probably still overweight. The average man in America is 28% body fat, so you're close to average, but that isn't really saying very much. You are still not optimal in terms of health. You will probably still have a sizable belly as this guy shows. You will probably have, not a lot of definition anywhere. In the back, in the front, not a lot of muscle showing through. And, this guy's self-assessed at 22%. Not even once, bro. Not even once. Then Greg assessed this guy at 30% body fat, and I think I agree. You can see there is a little bit of a belly. It's spilling over the waistline. So if you are above 30% body fat, you will probably still have a little bit of a belly no matter what. No matter how you store your fat, it's going to be there somewhere. He does have a good base of muscle mass, and you can still look decent in clothes at 30% body fat, but I would say this is still far from optimal in terms of health. You can see he does have pretty decent arms. If he lost, 20, 30, 40 pounds, he would have a hell of a physique. And then also from the back, he looks pretty good. He has a good frame, and he probably has a lot smaller of a waist than it appears in this picture, just because a lot of that waist is going to be love handles. It's just going to be fat. And once you lose that fat, you have a much better physique, a much better frame. Going from 30% body fat down to 20% body fat, you will notice the size of the belly gradually reduces and you start to get more muscle definition basically everywhere. It won't be super crisp. You will look like you lift if you have some muscle, but you certainly are far from stage ready. At 22% body fat, this guy, still has a little bit of a belly. You can see there's, not very much abdominal definition. There's not really separation between the oblique and the abdominals. There's a little bit of separation between the delts and the chest, a little bit in the arms. And this guy has, pretty good quads. So you can see there's a little bit of definition around the knee. But still, nothing really pops out at you. Nothing really jumps out at you. And there's still quite a bit of blurriness everywhere. From the back, again, nothing really pops out at you. There's not a ton of muscular definition, but he's beginning to get a V taper because there's not really all that much fat around the waist. So if you think you have bad genetics, you think you have a bad frame, you think you don't have, that small waist, maybe you do. Maybe you have better genetics than you give yourself credit for, and you never actually took the time to find them. Now, the next guy at 21%, I would say perhaps he's a little bit lower, or maybe the last guy was a little bit higher. But you can see he has pretty good definition in the arms. There's a little bit of definition in the chest. The abdominals are starting to come through. Perhaps even a little bit of definition between the oblique and the abdominals. The quads have a little bit of definition and separation too. The neck doesn't really have very much fat, and therefore I would say he's probably high teens, although 21%, certainly not very far off. In the back, yeah, he's a little bit fatter in the back. You can see there's not really any definition between the traps, in the arms. There's a little bit of definition in the hamstrings, but not all that much. So I would say 21% is pretty reasonable. The next guy at 20%, I also agree with this. It's sort of hard to tell because of all the tattoos. But you can see there's a bit of arm definition. There's a bit of definition in the traps. He's not really, opening up and flexing properly. I think if he did, he would have more of a V-taper and it would look even more impressive. You can see perhaps there's a little bit of definition in the quads. And yeah, I would say 20% is fairly accurate. There's a bit of definition in the biceps as well. And overall, 20% makes a lot of sense. Next up, we have this guy at 18%. Now you can see he has loose skin around the belly. I have a few clients that have this situation. It's sort of unavoidable. I'm not sure if there's a lot you can do about it, but it's certainly better than the alternative and still being overweight. And so I say wear it with a badge of pride, a badge of honor. And it can make you look a little bit fatter than you actually are. This guy, if you just look at the belly, you'd say, oh, well, the belly is hanging over a little bit. Obviously, he's like 30% body fat. But if you look at the rest of the physique, the chest, the arms, the hamstrings, the back, overall, it is very lean. And I would say, yeah, 18% is very accurate, if not a little bit leaner. You can see the V-taper is there. You can see a little bit of skin fold in the back. But again, that is probably just due to the loose skin. Everywhere else looks very tight and very proportional. Next up, you have this guy at 17%. You can see he has a little bit of a thicker waist, but that looks to be a little bit more genetic than actual fat. You can see he doesn't really have a lot of abdominal definition, but he's also the kind of guy that if he lost 10 or 15 pounds, he would look ridiculous. He has that base of muscle. He's clearly put in the work. He's probably pretty strong as well. In the back, he has very, very good definition in the delts, in the upper back. I mean, he has 3D delts, and you don't really get 3D delts unless you are well below 20% body fat, typically. The legs are less than impressive, but again, he's not really flexing them properly. He's not really, sticking a leg back and actually flexing the hamstring. He even has a little bit of definition through the spinal erectors, through the arms. So I would say 17% body fat is very, very accurate. Next up, you have this guy who Greg pegged at 13% body fat. I might put this guy a little bit higher. At 13%, I'd like to see a little bit more definition between the oblique and the abdominals. But the arms are well defined. The chest has a bit of definition. The upper abs are showing in pretty clearly. He also has decent quads. Not a huge amount of muscle, but the muscle that is there is fairly well defined. So I would say 13 to 15% body fat is pretty reasonable. He needs to work on his lats. If he built up his lats a little bit, he would have a very, very good physique. His arms are decent. Traps are showing through, a little bit of spinal erectors. And so, yeah, 13 to 15% body fat is very, very reasonable. Next up, you have this guy. Greg put him, I think, at 12.5% body fat. I might actually put him a little bit leaner. Even in a front relaxed, the abdominals are clearly showing through. He has, at a 6-pack, maybe even an 8-pack. Clear vascularity in the biceps, in the forearms. The delts are popping through. The traps are popping through. He shows a little bit of quad definition as well. Through the upper back, you see, not a lot of definition in the mid and lower traps. But I think if he flexed, you would see that. Again, in the front double biceps, a lot of definition everywhere. You see the oblique separation there. You see a little bit of separation in the ribs, in the serratus, in the intercostals. And, the back double bicep, obviously very, very impressive. You see the separation between the teres major, between the lats, between the rotator cuff, between the rear delt, between the traps, between the delts. All of that shit is just on point. So I would say, and then look at his goddamn arms. You can see the separation even between the triceps, the brachialis, and the biceps. And that is when you know you're getting lean, when you start to notice separation between the 3 parts of the arm. And yeah, I would put him at probably closer to 10%, although of course it is a range, and 12% sort of makes a lot of sense as well. When you start going under 15% body fat is when you start to notice dramatic visual changes in your appearance. And so this guy at 12%, you can see the biceps are very clearly defined. He's starting to get more abdominal definition. The quads are starting to show through as well. And he's starting to show separation between the biceps and the triceps and the shoulders and the chest and the lats. Even a little bit of serratus is poking through as well. From the back, you start to notice the rotator cuff showing through. The rear delts start to pop a little bit more as well. And he's starting to get a pretty significant V-taper. Yes, part of this is genetics, but a lot of it is just low body fat percentage. So I would say 12% is very, very accurate. And this is when you start to get beach ready, or hoe ready, as some people say. But yeah, this is definitely a good place to be, and I would say 12% is a really, really good place to shoot for most people. Now, next you have this guy, and you can see he is obviously very, very lean. You can see vascularity in the biceps, in the forearms, through the delts. You can see separation between all of the abdominals. You can see the intercostals, the ribs, the serratus coming in. You can see separation between the delt, the chest, the trap. The collarbones are showing through. And, you know, I would say 8% body fat is very, very reasonable. If you look at this compared to the previous guy, you can see how just a few pounds can make a massive visual difference at this level. That might be like 4 to 5 pounds for most people. So even just a few weeks of dieting, you can, reveal dramatic visual changes at this level. From the back, he's not quite as lean. You don't really see any trap definition. You don't really see, any kind of meat between the shoulder blades, but it could just be how he is flexing. He's sort of just standing there relaxed, so that's sort of understandable. When he raises his arms in a front double bicep, you notice that, his lats are showing through. There's quite a bit of definition. There are veins in the lower abs, veins in the biceps, veins goddamn everywhere, and this is clearly indicative of a very low body fat percentage, and he looks great. I wouldn't really recommend going below this in body fat percentage, because that's when you start to run into issues like getting sick more often, getting cold, low libido, etc. But this level of conditioning, I would say, is achievable for a lot of guys and is a good place to be for a lot of guys. But if you can't sustain it, then there's nothing wrong with 12 to 15% body fat. Next up, you have this brosif, who is near contest condition, and he clearly has a ton of muscle. You can see the Pac-Man arms, which I hadn't actually heard before Greg said, but I think is a really good term to encapsulate what happens with this arm. You start to see like the biceps and the triceps and the brachialis sort of show through together. And if you just look at my arm compared to his arm, that shows you what the difference in body fat percentage is. So me right now, I'm probably 18, 19% body fat. And if I got down to his level of body fat percentage, my arm would look very, very similar. You can see, obviously, the ribs are showing through, the serratus, the lats are poking out, there's definition in the chest. The chest has that sort of armor-plated look, which you don't get at a higher body fat percentage. There is separation between the adductors, all heads of the quads, the obliques. He's just a mountain of a man. There's muscle poking out everywhere. And, if you are not in this level of condition, you're not under 10% body fat. I see people come to me all the time. They say, yeah, I'm like 10% body fat. And I say, show me a picture. And then they are actually 18% or 20%. And so just because you have the hint of abs doesn't mean you are 10% body fat or 7% body fat. And then from the back, you can see all heads of the delts pretty clearly. Separation between the triceps, the brachialis, and the biceps. The forearms have a bit of definition as well. The spinal erectors, there's a Christmas tree going on. There's separation between the teres major, the lats. The traps are much more pronounced than the other guy. Yes, he's flexing. Yes, it's a different pose. But this shows you real conditioning. When you can see the mid traps, the lower traps, everything is just poking through. He has a bit of glute definition, not a lot of hamstring definition, probably a weak point there, as Greg pointed out. But overall, he looks great. For most people, this is not sustainable, okay? Especially if you're natural. You should not expect to walk around like this 365 days a year. This is almost always indicative of pre-contest or unnatural, possibly both. So don't expect to look like this 365 days a year naturally. It's just not going to happen. Finally, you have this guy, and he's skinny. Yeah, he doesn't have a lot of muscle, but he's fucking diced. I mean, you could cut onions on those abs. Look at them. There is vascularity in the abs. There's clear separation between the obliques and the abdominals, all the way up the ribs. His biceps are very clearly defined, even though they're not huge. You know, you can see basically every goddamn fiber of the biceps. Forearms are very well separated. You can't really see his legs very accurately. Greg put him, I think, at 6% or maybe even 5% body fat. The reason why I disagree with 5% body fat is that he doesn't have a lot of muscle. So if he put on 50 pounds and was at this same amount of body fat, I might agree that he is 5%. But a skinny guy is not ever 5% because they don't have the muscle mass to actually offset that. So I would say 6% is pretty reasonable. Obviously, arguing about 1% isn't really worth it. It's sort of pedantic on my part, but I would say 6% is pretty reasonable. He is obviously very, very diced. And then from the back, again, you see the rotator cuff, you see the delts, you see the triceps, you see everything popping out, and almost no body fat obscuring any of this. And yeah, this guy is the kind of guy that if he ate a lot of food and he, you know, trained heavier with weights, he would absolutely blow up. If you're starting from a lean place, it makes it easier to gain muscle. And so, yeah, pretty impressive. And for the record, this guy thought he was 13% body fat when actually he was around 6% body fat. So I think there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation, people who are wrongfully estimating their body fat percentage both up and down, usually down, in this case up. But I think, you know, Greg was pretty much spot on with all of his assessments, and it shows that you can be pretty accurate just using the mirror. And a lot of these body fat measuring devices are pretty much bullshit. Most body fat, like impedance scales, pure fabrication. They could be off 5%, even 10%. So I think just going by the mirror and self-assessing and then measuring your progress over time and being honest with yourself is the best way to do it. All right, that is all for this video. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are not already for some crazy reason. You could be one of my first 1,000,000 subscribers, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.